A young bartender from a Pennsylvania pub vanished after closing time on a Saturday night, leaving behind a void that consumed everyone who knew him. But 6 years later, inside a room at a nearby motel, exterminators discover a sinister secret hidden beneath the carpet, a discovery that would be connected to the missing bartender in the most unexpected way and reveal a nightmare far more twisted than anyone could have imagined. The Pennsylvania countryside blurred past Caleb Bruner's windshield as he navigated the winding roads toward Lancaster, his 2003 Honda Accord had been running for over an hour since he'd left his solitary home outside the county. The engine humming steadily beneath the hood. The November afternoon was crisp and clear, typical for 2005's autumn season. His phone buzzed insistently on the passenger seat. The caller ID showed Detective Marissa Keen's number, a sequence of digits he'd memorized over the past 6 years. He flipped it open with one hand while keeping his eyes on the road. Detective Keen, he answered, trying to keep the anticipation out of his voice. Caleb, where are you now? Her voice was professional, but carried an undertone of urgency that made his pulse quicken. Just entered Lancaster. I'm about 15 minutes from the station. He slowed as he passed the welcome sign, its painted letters cheerfully declaring, Lancaster, heart of Pennsylvania, Dutch country, change of plans, can you meet me at the Lancaster Pines Motel instead? It's not far from the station, maybe 10 minutes, take route 30 east, then turn north on Centerville Road, you'll see it on your right, can't miss, the neon sign, the motel. Caleb's grip tightened on the steering wheel. What's this about, detective? I'll explain. When you get here, I'll be waiting at the entrance. The line went dead. Caleb closed the phone and set it back on the seat, his mind racing. It had been for years since he'd last seen Detective Keen in person, though they'd spoken on the phone periodically. About Ethan's case, his younger brother had vanished 6 years ago, seemingly into thin air, leaving behind only questions and a grief that had hollowed out their family. Following the detective's directions, he found the Lancaster Pines Motel easily enough. It was a typical roadside establishment, 2 stories of faded blue doors facing a cracked parking lot. The neon sign flickered intermittently, the PN Pines struggling to stay lit. Several police cruisers were parked haphazardly near one of the ground floor units, their presence drawing a crowd of curious onlookers. Caleb parked his Honda away from the commotion and stepped out, scanning for the detective. He spotted her immediately. Marissa Keen hadn't changed much in 4 years. Her auburn hair was pulled back in the same practical ponytail, her navy blazer as crisp as ever. She was speaking with a uniformed officer, but looked up as he approached Caleb. She said, extending her hand, thanks for coming so quickly. He shook it, noting the firm grip. What's going on here? Follow me. She led him through the gathering crowd. Motel guests in various states of dress clustered in the corridor, craning their necks to see into the open door of room. 6 staff members in burgundy uniforms whispered among themselves. Detective Keen's presence parted them like a ship through water. Inside the unit, the scene was controlled chaos. Crime scene technicians photographed every surface, while uniformed officers kept a perimeter. The room itself was standard motel fare, dated floral bedspread, particle board furniture, the lingering scent of industrial cleaner failing to mask years of transient occupation. Hernandez, Detective Keen, called to a woman in a maid's uniform standing near the door with a nervous-looking man in a manager's name tag. This is Caleb Bruner. Can you explain what you found? The maid, whose name tag read Maria, wrung her hands as she spoke. I was deep cleaning the room. We do it every few months when we have vacancies. I noticed moths coming from under the carpet near the window, lots of them. So Mr. Davidson here, he called the exterminator company. The manager Davidson picked up the story when the exterminators started to roll back the carpet to check for an infestation they found, he gestured toward the corner of the room where several technicians were working. Caleb moved closer and felt his stomach drop on the exposed wooden flooring. Someone had drawn an elaborate symbol in what appeared to be black paint or marker. It was a pentagram enclosed in a circle with smaller symbols at each point. Dark stains, unmistakably old blood, spotted other areas of the floor, though not directly near the symbol. What does this have to do with Ethan? Caleb asked, his voice tight. My brother was a devout Christian. He would never. Detective Keene held up an evidence bag. We ran a preliminary DNA test on the blood. The field test matched it to your brother's profile. From our database, we had his DNA on file from personal items, his toothbrush and comb that you provided 6 years ago. Caleb stared at the bag, trying to process this information. The blood is 6 years old, and you're certain the test is accurate? Field tests aren't 100%, but they're reliable enough for us to proceed. She held up another evidence bag, this one containing a black cord with a pendant. We also found this through the plastic. Caleb could see a simple Christian cross, the kind sold in religious bookstores throughout Pennsylvania. It was tarnished with age, but still recognizable. Detective Keene turned the bag so he could see the back of the cross etched into the metal in small, precise letters. Ethan Matthew Brunner, June 15th, 1999. That's his full name, Caleb said slowly. But the date, that's not his birthday, not his baptism date either. I don't know what that date means. The necklace matches the description in our files. You confirmed 6 years ago that he often wore a cross pendant. Yes, but I never really looked at the back, never saw this date. Caleb handed the evidence bag back, his hands unsteady. Is there anything else, any other sign of him? Not yet, we're still processing the scene. Detective Keene studied him carefully. Caleb, what do you make of that symbol? He looked again at the pentagram on the floor. It's obviously occult, satanic probably. Are there groups like that around here? The detective exchanged glances with another officer. Pennsylvania is deeply religious, Lancaster especially. We've had reports of some occult activity among college students, mostly harmless stuff. Kids playing it, being rebellious. There are a few groups, but nothing we've been able to act on. No criminal activity we could prove. Did Ethan ever mention anything like this? Any strange groups, people who might have had a problem with him? No, never. He kept to himself, mostly just worked weekends at that pub. Caleb paused. What about his boss, the pub owner, out of town currently? We're trying to reach him. Detective Keene turned to the motel manager, Mr. Davidson. I need this room sealed. No one goes in or out without police authorization, and I strongly recommend you install security cameras. The lack of surveillance footage is going to make this investigation much harder. Davidson nodded vigorously. Of course, detective, whatever you need. She turned back to Caleb. I need to coordinate with my team. Re-enter all the staff who were working 6 years ago. We'll need to track down anyone who's left employment here since then. She paused, her expression softening slightly. Why don't you get some rest? We'll handle the investigation from here. I think I'll stay in town for a few days, Caleb said. See if I can help somehow. She handed him some paperwork. I'll need you to sign these, confirming the identification of the personal effects. And Caleb, I'm sorry, we're meeting again under these circumstances. He signed where indicated and returned the forms. As he left the room, he passed the manager, calling his staff together for police questioning at the front desk. Caleb booked a room for the night, his mind still reeling from what he'd seen. The desk clerk processed his credit card efficiently, then hurried off. To join the other staff alone in the lobby, Caleb noticed a rack of tourist brochures. One caught his eye. Lancaster Nightlife among the listings was the Crossroads pub, noting it opened at noon daily. He checked his watch to 30 p.m., the pub where Ethan had worked, where he'd spent his last weekend. Before disappearing, Caleb pocketed the brochure and headed for his car. The Crossroads pub sat on a corner lot, its weathered brick facade and neon beer signs marking it as a local institution. Caleb pushed through the heavy wooden door, letting his eyes adjust to the dimness inside. The interior was exactly what he'd expected. Dark wood paneling, a long bar with brass fixtures, and the mingled scents of old beer and lemon cleaner. A lone bartender stood behind the bar, polishing glasses with mechanical precision. He was a thin man in his 40s, with graying hair pulled back in a ponytail. He looked up as Caleb approached, setting down his towel. "What'll it be?" "The bartender asked Jack and Coke," Caleb said, settling onto a bar stool as the bartender mixed his drink. Caleb studied the man's movements, efficient, practiced, the hallmark of someone who had been doing this for years. When the glass was set before him, Caleb took a sip before speaking. "Is the owner around today?" The bartender shook his head. "Nah, Mr. Cordell's been out of town for about a week. Business trip or something, should be back soon, though." He picked up another glass to polish. "Something I can help you with, maybe?" Caleb rotated his glass on the bar. "You hear about what's going on at the Lancaster Pines Motel police investigation?" The bartender's hands stilled for just a moment before resuming their work. "Heard something about it. Cops found something in one of the rooms. Did you know Ethan Bruner? He used to work here." Now the bartender sat down the glass entirely, his expression guarded. "Yeah, I knew Ethan, worked some shifts with him back in the day. Good guy, reliable." His eyes narrowed slightly. "Why you asking?" "I'm his brother Caleb." The bartender's demeanor shifted immediately, a wall coming up behind his eyes. He picked up his towel again. Movement. Suddenly jerky look. "I already told the cops everything I knew 6 years ago. If they need to talk to me again, they know where to find me. They'll probably be here tomorrow anyway." "I'm not trying to cause trouble," Caleb said, confused by the reaction. "Ethan always spoke well of the people here, said you were all like family." "We were, until he disappeared." The bartender's voice was flat, changed everything. Caleb leaned forward. "Can you help me understand this town better? The community. I've heard there might be some unusual groups around. Cults, maybe even satanic ones." The bartender's laugh was humorless. "Man, this is a college town. We get all types in here. Goths, punks, philosophy majors who think they're edgy. Nothing wrong with any of them, far as I can see." He moved down the bar, creating distance. "They drink, they pay, they don't cause trouble. That's all I care about. But have you noticed any actual organized groups? Anyone who might have had a problem with Ethan?" "I serve drinks. I don't get involved in people's business." The door chimed as new customers entered. 2 college students, a young man and woman, both dressed in black jeans and band t-shirts. They approached the bar, pulling out their IDs before the bartender could ask. He checked them carefully, then poured 2 draft beers. Caleb finished his Jack and Coke, pulling out his wallet. He laid a 20 on the bar, enough to cover the drink and a decent tip. As he stood to leave, the bartender suddenly spoke. "Look, I didn't mean to be rude, just trying to be careful about what I say. The owner, Mr. Cordell, he knew your brother better than any of us. When he gets back, he might be able to tell you more." The bartender glanced at Caleb, then away. "But if you really want to know about Ethan, you might try his church. He went every Sunday morning, regular as clockwork." "Which church?" "Don't know exactly which one he attended, but there's a big Protestant church over on King Street, Lancaster community. Presbyterian, most locals go there." He paused. "Your brother was serious about his faith, real serious." "Thank you," Caleb said sincerely. He glanced at the college students who were deep in conversation over their beers. Both wore unusual rings on their right hands. Silver bands with what looked like some kind of design he couldn't quite make out from this distance. Probably some band logo or fashion trend he was too old to understand. He left an extra 5 on the bar and headed for the door. The afternoon sunlight, harsh after the pub's darkness, Caleb climbed back into his Honda and pulled out his Garmin GPS unit, typing in Lancaster. Community Presbyterian with the stylus. The device calculated for a moment before displaying the route, only a 10-minute drive through the historic district. He pulled out of the pub's parking lot and followed the electronic Voyix directions through Lancaster's tree-lined streets. The church came into view as he turned onto King Street, its white steeple rising above the surrounding buildings like a beacon. But it was the activity across the street that first caught his attention. Franklin and Marshall College students had set up what appeared to be some kind of fair or recruitment event in the park. Opposite the church, colorful banners fluttered between temporary stalls, and students in matching black t-shirts moved between the tables. He recognized the same style of clothing the two students in the bar had worn. Caleb parked along the curb and walked toward the church. Deliberately ignoring the student gathering, the Presbyterian church was an impressive structure, red brick with white trim, tall windows with proper glazing and heavy oak doors that spoke of permanence and tradition. He pulled open one of the doors and stepped into the naths. The interior was quiet for a weekday afternoon, but not empty from the sanctuary. He could hear voices raised in harmony, a choir rehearsing. He followed the sound, his footsteps echoing on the polished floor. In the sanctuary, about 15 people stood in the choir, loft their voices blending in what sounded like a traditional hymn. A man in his 50s stood before them, conducting with precise movements. He wore a clerical collar and black shirt, clearly the pastor. Caleb waited in a pew until the song ended, then approached. As the pastor gave notes to his choir, the man noticed him and excused himself, walking down to meet Caleb with an extended hand. "Welcome to Lancaster Community Presbyterian. I'm Pastor David Hartley." "Caleb Bruner," he replied, shaking the offered hand. "Sorry to interrupt your rehearsal." "Not at all. The choir can practice on their own for a few minutes." Pastor Hartley's eyes were kind, but searching. "What brings you to our church today?" "I'm looking for information about my brother, Ethan Bruner. He went missing 6 years ago, someone told me. He might have been a member of your congregation." The pastor's brow furrowed thoughtfully. "Ethan Bruner, I'm afraid the name doesn't immediately ring a bell. You have to understand, we have over 700 members at each service, and we hold 3 services. Every Sunday, I tend to remember those most active in church programs." But he paused. "Do you have a photograph?" Caleb pulled out his Motorola Razr flip phone. Navigating to the saved photos, he showed the pastor a picture of Ethan from his bartending days, proudly displaying 2 colorful cocktails he'd created. The cross pendant was clearly visible against his white shirt. Pastor Hartley said, pointing at the screen. "I don't recognize the young man, but I definitely recognize the cross we give those to members who complete our evangelism seminar, Winning Souls for Christ. It's an intensive 12-week course on sharing the gospel and bringing new disciples to the Lord. There's a date engraved on the back," Caleb said. "June 15th, 1999. Would that mean anything?" "That would be his graduation date from the seminar. We always engrave them as a commemoration." The pastor's expression grew more serious. "If your brother completed that course, he was a dedicated Christian, baptized, committed to spreading God's word." Caleb took a breath. "Pastor, the police found something this morning at the Lancaster Pines Motel. There was an occult symbol drawn on the floor in blood that matches my brother's DNA." Pastor Hartley's face darkened. "I cannot believe anyone who wore that cross would willingly participate in occult practices. It goes against everything we teach, everything the seminar represents." "I agree. I think someone else did this to him, someone who might be part of an occult group." Caleb leaned forward. "Are there groups like that in Lancaster?" The pastor sighed, deeply glancing toward the windows. "I'm afraid so. It's actually why we started The evangelism seminar in the first place, we've seen an alarming increase in occult fascination among young people, especially college students. Witchcraft, magic, circles, ritual practices, what starts as rebellion or curiosity can lead to much darker places. How organized are these groups? More than you might think. They don't just meet in secret anymore. They hold open festivals, recruit at student organizations. They're bold about it, Pastor. Hartley gestured toward the window that event across the street. I guarantee you'll find at least 1 or 2 occult groups recruiting there, and the police don't do anything. What can they do? Freedom of religion, freedom of assembly. Until there's criminal activity, they can prove their hands are tied. The pastor's voice carried frustration, but it's very much the church's concern. The Lord forbids such practices, and we must protect our flock. Caleb stood. Maybe I should check out that student event. If you do, be careful, Pastor Hartley warned. Most of the students are just curious kids following trends, but the leaders, the ones really running these groups, they must have agendas. Why do you say that? We've had reports from congregation members, stories of rituals, ceremonies, but no one's ever brought forward real evidence of illegal activities. The pastor paused. Regarding your brother, I'll cooperate fully with any investigation. Now that you mention it, I do remember the police coming here 6 years ago, asking questions. I'll help, however. I can thank you, Pastor. I appreciate your time. Remember, Pastor Hartley said as Caleb turned to leave, if you do encounter these people, pray for God's protection, and if you see anything illegal, contact the police immediately. Caleb nodded, shook the pastor's hand again, and walked back through the sanctuary. The choir had resumed their rehearsal, their voices following him out into the afternoon sun. Outside Lancaster Community Presbyterian, the afternoon sun cast long shadows across King Street. The student event in the park was clearly winding down. Several stalls had already been dismantled, and students were loading folding tables into vans. It made sense, they'd probably been there since morning, and it was now pushing 3:30 p.m. Caleb stood on the church steps, debating his approach. He was 32, clearly not college-aged, and would stand out among the students. As he weighed his options, a group of 5 students emerged from behind one of the remaining stalls. They were impossible to miss. Heavy black makeup rimmed their eyes, their hair styled in deliberately messy spikes and colors that didn't occur in nature. They moved as a pack, laughing at some private joke. One of them, a young man with green-streaked hair, pointed directly at Caleb standing on the church steps. The whole group turned to look, and their laughter grew louder. They began making exaggerated signs of the cross, mockingly genuflecting in his direction. Bless you, church boy. One of the girls called out, her voice dripping with sarcasm. Caleb noticed they all wore identical rings on their right hands. The same style he'd glimpsed at the bar. Now he could see them more clearly, silver bands with what appeared to be a ram's head design. He chose to ignore their taunts, watching as they climbed into a beat-up Ford.